And the women were dressed in white, and they marched down Pennsylvania Avenue the day before President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. And it wasn't a celebratory event. These women were marching to secure the right to vote. And that right had been denied to them simply because of their gender. And at the time, women had been organizing for decades prior. Since before the Civil War, they were calling for full citizenship and then really, obviously, the right to cast a ballot. But progress was slow, so this 1913 women's suffrage parade was a big turning point in that. So I'm going to highlight a few of some of the characters in this here. So we have Alice Paul, and she was raised in a Quaker family in New Jersey, and I'm from New Jersey, and I remember learning about Alice Paul when I was a kid. And she believed deeply in equality. She studied in England, and she learned about the British suffrage movement, and then came back and to the U.S. and she organized demonstrations. She led powerful protests, but always peaceful protests. And she was imprisoned. And then this was all to push for the federal amendment to the Constitution for the 19th Amendment. So her determination did help lead to the eventual ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. And that, as most of us know, that granted the women the legal right to vote. So then we have someone who I had not heard of before. And so I learned about her while I was researching for this. Her name was Ida B. Wells. And she's often left out of a lot of the mainstream narratives because she was a pioneering journalist. She was a civil rights advocate, and she spoke out on injustice, but she insisted that voices and experiences of Black women be seen and heard within the suffrage movement. So during this 1913 march, the Black women were all told to march at the back of the parade, and she refused. She just walked right in. She walked in with the Illinois delegation. She was from Illinois at the time, and she challenging both sexism and racism in this fight for equality. And this was in 1913. And then we have the Silent Sentinels. So the Silent Sentinels were women who just stood silently outside the White House day in and day out, many, many days, holding banners that called on the president to support women's voting rights. And again, always peaceful persistence in the face of hostility, and that became a very powerful symbol for resilience and resolve. And the 19th Amendment did finally pass in 1920, so 7 years after the 1913 parade or march. And the journey to voting rights was not over because many women of color continued to face the barriers for decades. So they kept marching, and we will move on to our next step. But before we do that, our next stop, I'm sorry. Before we do that, let's take a quick moment of reflection to honor all of those women, all of the peaceful resistance that they did in order for us to have our rights today. Then we move to stop 2, which is the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement, we are going to move forward from 1913, 1920, and now we're on to 1960s. So this is a pivotal decade in American history and the height of the civil rights movement. So first, we will walk with Amelia Boynton Robinson. So Amelia was a courageous voting rights advocate, and she was the first Black woman in Alabama to run for Congress. And in 1965, she joined hundreds of peaceful marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, standing up for the right to vote. Despite facing violent resistance that day, she returned to the movement with even more determination. So if you are familiar at all with Bloody Sunday, this is Bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So I'm keeping it light for this talk, but if you want to learn more about Amelia and the amazing things she did, I recommend looking up a little bit more information about her. But she later said, she's quoted to say, "You can never know the feeling of being in a struggle unless you've been in it." And she continued to inspire a nation, not only women, not only Black women, but everyone to pay attention and to act on what you're feeling. Next, we will meet Diane Nash, and she was a brilliant organizer, and she was from Fisk University. She was very young, just 22 years old, and she played a key role in some of the most impactful civil rights actions of the time. She helped organize the freedom rides, the sit-in movement. She stood firm in her belief of nonviolence. Again, this is consistent throughout all of these people and women that marched. It was always nonviolent and it was always peaceful. And even when she put herself at risk, she was still nonviolent in all of it. And she had a way of being very powerful and standing up for justice while also remaining in that peaceful position. And many of us know Coretta Scott King, and we know her as the wife of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, but she was also an activist in her own right. She organized peace marches, she spoke out globally against injustice, and she also worked for decades after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. died to maintain his legacy and continue to advance civil and human rights. She connected struggles for racial justice with movements for gender equality, economic fairness, and peace. So she did amazing things, and we often, we know her for her husband, but she did her own things in her own right. So we'll move to the next stop, but as we move to our next stop, please take a quick moment to honor these brave women. They all walked before us on the long journey towards justice. And next stop we will have is women who explored. And these, I had heard of Nellie Bly, but these other two women I had not heard of, and it was so fun to read their stories and read all about them. So now we're going to shift direction a little bit because all these women explored the world and explored mountains and trails, not in protest, but still showing us that women are so powerful. So first we're going to start with Nellie Bly. And she is such an interesting person and totally inspired me because of her story. So she was a journalist and she was so courageous for doing things that were impossible for women at the time. Because at the time, in the late 1800s, women were expected to stay home, be quiet, proper, have all their manners, not travel, not question authority. They were just in a tightly knit box there. And Nellie did all of the things not that. So when she was 23, she went undercover in a New York City mental asylum where a bunch of women were kept in this mental asylum, not necessarily even needing to be there. And she pretended to be mentally ill to expose all of the horrific things going on in this mental asylum. So neglect, abuse, mistreatment, and she wrote a resulting expose called 10 Days in the Madhouse. And it was shocking, but it also led to significant reforms in mental health care. So if you haven't read about that story, it's so interesting. So again, I would love to just go into more detail about all of these amazing women, but it's super interesting. So then Nellie many years later, in 1889, decided, inspired by Jules Verne Around the World in 80 Days, decided she wanted to do that for real, but she wanted to do it faster than 80 days. So she packed a small bag and she started off on a steamship and set off alone, which women were not allowed to travel alone at the time. And and obviously women weren't able to even vote at the time. And she traveled the world, the globe, circled the globe, I should say, solo. She went over oceans, she went through all different unfamiliar lands, and she completed it in 72 days. So that was the world record at the time, just proving that women are unstoppable. And then we have next Emma Gatewood, and she is otherwise known as Grandma Gatewood. Another inspiring figure. She, in 1955, she was 67 years old. If you're looking at your computer screen, she's in this picture in the middle. And she was the first woman to hike the Appalachian Trail alone. At 67, she was the first one to do it. And you can see here, this is an actual picture of her. And if you're not looking at your computer screen, which I hope you're out walking, she carried just like a sack and hiked 2,000 plus miles. She wore sneakers. She didn't have anywhere to stay. She just slept under trees, as far as I'm finding in my research here. And she escaped domestic violence, and she was a survivor, and she found so much solace in nature. So that is what inspired her to keep going. And then she spoke out a lot on the preservation of the Appalachian Trail and also brought a lot of interest in it. So more people started to be interested in it, and then again, more preservation efforts for it. And then this final person that I'm going to highlight for this one is Junko Tabei. I wanted to make sure to say it right, Junko Tabei. And she was a Japanese climber who shattered tons of barriers as a woman in Japan at the time. So in 1970, this is in 1975, she became the first woman to summit Mount Everest. And when she was summiting Mount Everest, there was avalanches. I read a story about it. She had, obviously there was a lot of cultural skepticism around it, but there was at least one avalanche that she had to conquer when she was summiting Mount Everest. And then after she summited Mount Everest, she went and did the 7 summits, which is the summit, the highest peak on each continent. So she is just amazing. And so I hope all of those women inspire you to try something new. So I want you to reflect before we move to our next stop. If you could take one journey, Nellie went around the world, Emma went on the Appalachian Trail, Junko went up to Mount Everest and the 7 summits, where would you go on your journey? And keep walking with that vision in mind as we move to our 4th stop. Okay, our stop number 4 is Indigenous and environmental activists. And many of these are about protecting the earth. So I'll begin with Winona LaDuke. And maybe some of you have heard of some of these people that I'm going to talk about in the next little bit. But Winona is an economist and author and activist, and she has devoted her life to protecting and defending Indigenous lands. She has a nonprofit called Honor the Earth, and that works with Native-led environmental work all across Turtle Island. So she has helped battle the oil pipelines in Minnesota. She has restored Indigenous food systems, and all of her activism, I'm going to continue to say it, is rooted in love and peace. And she has a vision for future generations. So she's wanting to protect what's sacred, but also build up future generations as well. And speaking of future generations, we have another person, another female. Her name is Autumn Peltier. And she is from the Weequampong First Nation in Ontario. And she became a water protector. An international water protector. She started speaking out at, get this, 12 years old. At 12 years old, she addressed world leaders at the United Nations and she demanded action on water rights, especially within the Weequampong First Nation. The water quality was horrendous, and she said to the United Nations, again, this is quoted, she said, "We can't eat money, we can't drink oil," because the oil was seeping into their water supply. So, and that brings me to Standing Rock. So, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with it. It still to this day has a lot of things going on over there. But in 2016, there was a global movement to protect the Missouri River from the Dakota Access Pipeline. So if you're not familiar with Standing Rock, you may have heard of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And it was trying to be stopped, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and it started as just a small camp in that area. And then more and more Indigenous nations started to come in, and it became one of the largest gatherings in modern history. And although this was both men and women really played a critical role in this, because Winona, who I spoke of earlier, and she was heading up a lot of this. And then there were women that called themselves the water protectors. And you can find videos of them singing and praying over the water. It is so beautiful. And they said they're water protectors of their sacred waters. Unfortunately, the Standing Rock fight is still continuing. In 2020, there was a federal court that ordered a full environmental review of the pipeline, but the pipeline is still going, and there's still that environmental review that's being asked for, but there's a lot of politics involved, unfortunately. So we will continue to see what happens with that. But I want to circle this back to protecting the environment. So before we move to our next stop, first, I want to mention that Earth Day is on Tuesday, and we will be hosting a garbage pickup and walk at the International Peace Gardens. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end of this workshop. But as we're moving to our next stop, I want you to think about, what is one small action that you can take this week to be more of a caretaker of the earth? We have Autumn here, who's 12 years old, protecting water for billions of people. So we have this power within us. And so what will you do this week to be a caretaker of the earth? Okay, and here we have stop 5 to our current day, because guess what? Women are still walking. In 2017, the Women's March was one of the largest global protests in history, and millions of women, men, children gathered in 80 countries to stand up for gender equality, civil rights, LGBTQ plus rights, reproductive justice. And since then, the steps have never stopped. Women are walking and continue to walk for reproductive rights, for healthcare access, for equal pay, education, safety, equal opportunity. They're walking for themselves, their families, and for future generations. So as I finish up, we just have a few more minutes. I'm going to talk about some of our upcoming walks in the next couple of slides. But my question for you, my final reflection is, who are you walking for, and where will your steps lead you? You do not have to do something big, but keep in mind all of these women were just like us. just a normal person, and they believed in something so strongly that they were able to stand up for it and make positive change, all peaceful and all nonviolent. So thank you all for being here on this rainy day to honor all of these trailblazers. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of our upcoming walks. We have, like I mentioned, we have the Earth Day walk, but tomorrow night we have Bell's Canyon. It's a guided hike. Um, it's a little bit of an incline, but it's a beautiful hike, and hopefully we have better weather than we have today. I think it's going to be a little chilly, but that's good for these hikes. So hopefully you'll join us for that. And then if not, we have next Tuesday, the Earth Day walk and cleanup. So that'll be at 6 p.m. It's a very flat, even surface. So if you are not a hiker, this is a great one for you to just come, and we'll pick up trash and connect, and I'll be there with my family. So I hope you will all come, and thank you all for joining me on this walk. I finished 5 minutes early, so I hope you take this last 5 minutes to just kind of walk, reflect, honor all of these women that have come before us, and have a lovely day. Thank you, everybody.